One of the main joys of playing through a Pokemon game is building your team. There are so many options and potential combinations that if you get creative enough, you can have several playthroughs that feel totally different to one another. Of course, there are Pokemon who will be more or less effective on your average playthrough of a Pokemon game. No matter how creative you want to get, there are some Pokemon you may want to rely on to help you out. So today, we're going to be going over the best Pokemon to use in a playthrough of Pokemon Red, Blue, or Yellow. And starting off at number 10, we have Charmander, Bulbasaur, and Squirtle. These are, of course, the starter Pokemon of Gen 1 and are usually a shoo-in for any team thanks to their useful types, gentle experience curve, and multiple evolutions at perfect times to be balanced for the game. However, it's also a bit of a cheat to say you should use your starter for your playthrough, so they're typically excluded from these kinds of lists. And that would go for this list as well if we were just talking about Pokemon Red and Blue. But Pokemon Yellow is quite a different beast altogether. Rather than being allowed to use one of these three starters, you start the game with Pikachu, just like Ash in the anime. And like Ash, you can encounter the other three starters along your journey. Bulbasaur can be found in Cerulean City, Charmander can be found on Route 24 above the Nugget Bridge, and Squirtle in Vermilion City, each at the ripe level of 10. While not at the perfect level for the point in the game at which you find them, they're not that far behind. And getting to use any of these starters can help patch up your team extremely easily in a playthrough of Pokemon Yellow. Getting all three is even better, as it gives you a perfect fire/water/grass core, meaning you'll have an answer to any fire, water, or grass Pokemon that shows up, and have Pokemon for a huge percentage of the types in the game if you want to use all three. The thing is, this only applies to Yellow versions specifically. As great as these starters are for your journey through Kanto, this section of this video can only apply to one of the three Gen 1 games, and it's one that a lot of people don't prefer versus the original versions of the games. While these are some of the absolute best gift Pokemon in the entire franchise, they can't be any higher than this spot because of the massive asterisk around them. Charmander, Bulbasaur, and Squirtle are amazing in Kanto and absolutely should be considered for a Pokemon Yellow playthrough, but they can only really take the number 10 spot here. Now, if you've ever bought trading cards the old way, you know the routine. Buy a box, tear open the packs, pull a few good cards, send them off for grading, then wait weeks before you can sell or trade them. Arena Club takes that whole process and puts it online so it happens instantly. I made an account and now I have my own online showroom where every card I get shows up automatically. When you buy one of their slab packs, it's like opening a mystery pack of already graded cards right on your screen. You can see what cards are possible before you buy, you rip it digitally, and the graded card appears in your showroom right away. From there, you can either keep it in your online collection, have it shipped to you, sell it to someone else, or just take the cash offer they show you on the spot. It's basically the fun of ripping packs without the long wait for grading or the hassle of mailing stuff back and forth or looking for buyers. I've been doing it myself and it's been a blast watching my collection fill up instantly. Right now, you can get 20% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to thearenaclub.com/thedexlogs and using the code TheDexlogs at purchase here. And at number 9, we have Dugtrio. This is a pure ground type Pokemon known for its incredible speed and low bulk. It's also a famous Pokemon for Gen 1 playthroughs, as the designers of the game very obviously placed it into the game specifically to help out the players. The third gym in the game is Lieutenant Surge, the electric type gym. Electric types are strange in Pokemon as they only have a single weakness in ground. Additionally, ground is completely immune to electric type attacks, making it one of the most lopsided type matchups in the series, since the number of options to deal with electric types are on the low end, and there's a good chance the player has something like a Pidgeot or a Sparrow on their team at that point of the game. In order to give players more options, the designers placed Diglett Cave right next to Vermilion City, so players could pick up a handy ground type for this battle. Not only does Diglett fare well against Surge's electric types, but it's also a good Pokemon after that point. They're surprisingly fast, and once it evolves into Dugtrio, it has a decent attack stat even for the late game. This can lead to Dugtrio working as a strong sweeper. It also learns Earthquake by level up, which means you don't have to use your one-time use TM on the Pokemon. The main thing going against Dugtrio is that there is a lot of competition against it. There are other better ground types in the game, such as Rhydon in the Safari Zone, which is overall a stronger Pokemon. And while you don't get Rhydon before Lieutenant Surge, you can find Geodude, which shares Dugtrio's ground typing. Dugtrio is a good Pokemon, but it's also not unique in terms of what it does, and not the absolute best Pokemon in its category, so it's very possible to skip over. And at number 8, we have Haunter. This is a Ghost Poison type with a nice speed of 95 and a large 115 special. It and the rest of its evolutionary line are also the only Ghost types in the game, giving them a niche that nothing else can fill. This is supposed to make them a counter to the Psychic type, but unfortunately that didn't work because of Gen 1 Spaghetti Code. However, being a Ghost type still has a couple of massive upsides. Namely its 2 immunities to normal and fighting type attacks. This really matters because Gen 1 learn sets are completely stupid. Most Pokemon learn primarily normal type attacks despite not being normal types themselves, and many Pokemon lack reliable stab moves for their type. This meant that, especially in playthroughs, there are a lot of normal type attacks being thrown around. There are several important fights where several Pokemon lack any way of dealing damage to Haunter. For example, Bruno's Hitmonlee and Machamp only have fighting type attacks, and his Hitmonchan can only hit you with Ice Punch, which won't be doing that much damage. On top of that, Haunter also learns Hypnosis by level up, which combined with its relatively high speed, can allow you to outspeed and sleep opponents that set up for easy knockouts. There is a pretty big problem though, and that's that Haunter will have some difficulty evolving. As a trait evolution, you'll need a lot of extra hardware to evolve into a Gengar, and as a Haunter, it has some pretty low stats. Its HP and defense are low, leaving it quite frail, and it's not as fast as a lot of other Pokemon. This is quite disappointing, but the power of Haunter's typing means that it's not necessarily worth avoiding. Not to mention, on most playthroughs, you're going to have to go to the Pokemon Tower and encounter some Gastly anyway. So it's very easy to just catch one while you're there. There are some better options, but Haunter brings a lot to the table that nothing else really can. And if you can get Gengar, it's an amazing option. And at number 7, we have Tentacruel. This is a water poison type with a good overall stat spread. Average HP, below average attack and defense, but an impressive special of 120 and a speed of 100. Tentacruel is one of the easiest to find water types that's exceptionally powerful, a trait that is in high demand not only because water types are good, but because you need a Pokemon with Surf to complete the game. This means that you're definitely in the market for at least one Surf user, which is likely to be a water type on your team. Tentacruel is very easy to find and one of the better water types in the game, making it a great choice for just about any team. And all you have to do to find Tentacruel is to get the Super Rod on Route 12 and then fish at one of the many spots, including on Route 12 itself. From there, you can easily raise it up to a Tentacruel without much issue. Then, as soon as you get the Surf HM, it already has access to one of the best water type attacks in the game. Your reward for all this work is a Pokemon that's far stronger than most realize. Tentacruel's special attacks hit weirdly hard, and it's an oddly fast Pokemon for how tanky it is. While not the best physical tank, it has immense special bulk, and an average HP stat, letting it tank special hits after outspeeding a lot of threats you'll come up against. This makes Tentacruel a prime contender for your Surfer in a playthrough. The issue is that, well, you kind of have to have a water type on your team in Gen 1 playthroughs, and there are a couple of Pokemon that are just slightly better than Tentacruel. If you choose Squirtle as your starter, you're probably not going to want to double up on water types. So that's 1/3 of players who aren't that interested in Tentacruel. And there's also one other Pokemon we'll talk about soon that's slightly better as your Surfer too. Still, it's not exactly uncommon to see Tentacruel on playthrough teams despite the competition. And at number 6, we have Zapdos. This is a flying electric type with good to great stats all around, and everything being at least 85, and their best stat with 125 special and 100 speed. It's also, obviously, one of the 3 legendary birds, and is for some reason both one that's the most accessible and the most powerful. Flying/electric is, overall, a good typing, as opposed to flying/ice and flying/fire, having fewer weaknesses and no 4x weaknesses to rock. It's also found in the Power Plant as opposed to the Seafoam Islands or Victory Road, which can be found off of Route 9 as long as you have a Pokemon capable of surfing. While you can't use Surf until you get the Soul Badge from Koga and get the Surf HM from the Safari Zone, which you can technically do fairly early on. Many badges can be skipped in Gen 1, and all you're required to do before Zapdos are fight Brock, Misty, and Koga. This means you can, technically, get to Zapdos after only 3 gyms. However, this is mostly a technicality, as actually doing this is quite difficult and would require a lot of grinding. Zapdos is found at level 50, so you'll need a pretty strong team to be able to catch it. At which point, you could just use those Pokemon to beat those gyms anyway. However, going in the proper order, you unlock Zapdos after Gym 5 when your Pokemon should be in their 40s anyway. So going straight to the power plant and trying to get Zapdos at that point isn't an awful idea. As soon as you get Zapdos, you have one of the best Pokemon in the game and easily the best electric type. It deals tons of damage and is very fast and isn't horribly frail. It's also one of the few Pokemon to get Drill Peck in Gen 1, one of the only good flying type attacks. Now, you'll probably be using Fly on at least one Pokemon to get around, and Fly is at least okay in playthroughs, so this isn't that big of a deal. But Drill Peck is technically a bit better than Fly is. Zapdos is an insane Pokemon and very worth tracking down, but it's a bit difficult to actually catch and doesn't show up until you get a bit of a way into the game, which prevents it from being too high in this list. And at number 5, we have Kadabra. This is a pure psychic type with some pretty bad HP, attack, and defense stat, but an amazing special of 120 and speed of 105. Like Haunter before it, Kadabra is a trade evolution, so its usefulness depends a lot on if you can actually trade to evolve it. If you can, then Alakazam is a terror that can easily sweep through the game with the attack Psychic. However, unlike Haunter, Kadabra does a pretty good Alakazam impression even if it can't evolve. Its special is still stupidly high and it's quite fast, letting it attack first and deal big damage to most Pokemon in the game. This is all made much better by the power of the Psychic type in Gen 1. While it only dealt super effective damage to fighting and poison types, it's also resisted by essentially nothing. Combine this with Kadabra's great special stat and its lack of weaknesses, and Kadabra will outdamage most threats you come up against. You can also find Abra pretty early on in the game. It's found on routes 24 and 25, which you can access through Cerulean City where Misty is. The only annoyance is that Abra has a nasty habit of teleporting away as soon as it can, so it may be a bit tiresome to catch one. But if you just throw balls at it enough, you'll catch one eventually. Then you'll have to switch train it up for a while, but that's not that big of a downside as it will evolve at only level 16, at which point it will learn an attack and start being a useful part of the team. Another small benefit of Kadabra is that the poison type is very common in Kanto, especially against Team Rocket, who love to spam Arbok and Koffings that Kadabra could take out easily. Still, Kadabra does have a major weakness, which is how physically frail it is. There are a number of Pokemon that can take it out with one attack, and it's something you'll have to keep track of if you can't evolve it into the superior Alakazam. As good as Kadabra is, it's not the best option if it can't evolve. And at number 4, we have Nidoking. This is a ground/poison type with average stats across the board, and everything hovering around 80 besides its good attack stat of 92. It has a pretty good move pool and typing that's fine, but not amazing. It seems like overall, Nidoking is just an average Pokemon, nothing really noteworthy. And that's largely true, except for one little detail. You see, Nidoking can be obtained on Route 22 before the first gym of the game if you're willing to take a quick side trip, and evolves into Nidorino at level 16. After that, it evolves with a Moonstone, which you obtain in Mount Moon after the first gym. This means you can have Nidoking before the second gym of the game, giving you a fully evolved Pokemon with far better stats than the competition extremely early on into the game. This will steamroll literally everything for an incredibly long time. And while it does fall off in the late game, it's not like you're giving up anything to get Nidoking. The only Pokemon that evolved from the Moonstone are the Nidos, Clefable, and Wigglytuff, of which Nidoking is by far the best Pokemon of the bunch. There's barely any reason not to catch a Nidoking and use it for the first few gyms. Speaking of the first few gyms, this is another ground type option that can be used to absolutely decimate Lieutenant Surge's gym. There are only a few things keeping Nidoking from being higher on this list. For one, you won't have any ground type stab, or moves benefiting from the same type attack boost, unless you use a TM thanks to Gen 1 learn sets. It also does fall off in the late game, so it's not likely to be a permanent party member. However, it's great to pick up and use, which is all it really needs to be to secure a spot on this list. And at number 3, we have Eevee. This is a pure normal type Pokemon with pretty bad stats all around, but that's not really what matters here. As you know, Eevee's claim to fame is having by far the most evolutionary lines of any Pokemon. In Gen 1, you had Flareon, Vaporeon, and Jolteon, all of which are relatively good Pokemon. You also receive the Eevee for free as a gift in Celadon City, meaning that the only work you have to do to get this Pokemon is just walking into a building and pressing the A button. After which, all you have to do is go buy an evolution stone to get whatever evolution you want. The main appeal of Eevee as a party member is that it can patch up any weakness your team may have. If you don't know exactly what your team is going to need in the future, you can just pick up the Eevee and start training it up, and then evolve it when you need a Pokemon of a certain type. We should probably talk about Eevee's evolutions for a sec, considering they're the real stars of the show. The worst of the bunch is Flareon, which has a high attack stat of 130 and a solid special of 110, but slightly below average everything else. Since Fire is a special type in Gen 1, you don't quite get as much damage as you'd like, since you're not using that crazy 130 physical attack for your flamethrowers. It's still capable of dealing good damage off of its 110 special, but its below average speed and bulk will let you down sometimes. It's really only suggested you go for Flareon if you need a fire type and don't want to grab a Growlithe and train it up. Vaporeon is better, with a high 130 HP and same special of 110, with below average stats everywhere else. This makes Vaporeon a great special tank, being able to soak up special moves and fire back surfs. It's very viable to use Vaporeon as your surfer if you decide you really need a water type and don't want to grab Tentacruel or something else. The best overall is probably Jolteon, which has 110 special and a crazy high 130 speed. This means Jolteon will be outspeeding basically everything, which with its high special will allow it to two-shot a lot of Pokemon with a pair of Thunderbolts before they can KO it. While it is quite frail, it's not so frail as to drop any strong attack, and only needing to take 1 or 2 attacks, thanks to being one of the fastest Pokemon of the entire game, allows it to excel at being a Thunderbolt spammer. While none of these Pokemon are amazing, they're all good enough and can patch up holes on your team. This versatility makes this quick side trip to grab Eevee more than worth it. And at number 2, we have Gyarados. This is a monstrous water/flying type with an average speed and defense, slightly high HP, and crazy high attacking stats with 125 physical attack and 100 special. It evolves from the pitiful Magikarp, which can't even deal damage on its own. Of course, any Pokemon veterans know this is a complete non-issue. You can easily switch train Gyarados to level 20 and get a Pokemon with insane stats and surprisingly a good move pool if you use TMs. Magikarp are also very easy to get. You can buy one in Route 4's Pokemon Center for 500 Pokédollars, or you can fish them up literally everywhere with an old rod, which you get pretty early on. This is basically a discount version of Nidoking, where you can get a Pokemon with the stats of a late game Pokemon by the second gym, except it takes slightly more work and a bit more time before you get Gyarados. However, in exchange, you get a Pokemon you can use for literally the entire game. It can be your surfer to allow you to progress further into the game, and thanks to the special stats not being split yet, its water type moves actually do good damage in this generation off of a slightly high 100 special. Gyarados only has one weakness, and that's its very exploitable 4x weakness to electric type moves. However, outside of Lieutenant Surge's gym, this isn't really much of a concern. Electric type damage is rare and can be played around if you bother to check the movements of wild Pokemon or the moves of gym leaders before you fight them. It's a famously strong Pokemon, but there's one that barely manages to snatch the crown away from Gyarados. And at number 1, we have Snorlax. This is a pure normal type with a massive 160 HP, a solid 110 attack, slightly below average defense of 65, and a bad speed of 30. Snorlax is a very powerful Pokemon, capable of taking hits well thanks to its massively inflated HP stat and dish out good damage with its strong attack. It also has a weirdly deep move pool, able to learn a ton of TMs if you're willing to use them on it. For some reason, it can learn Blizzard, Thunderbolt, Fire Blast, and the like to let it blast certain Pokemon for weaknesses. However, it gets even dumber, as Snorlax is also one of the few Pokemon in the game to get Amnesia. This is a status move that raises your special by 2 stages, effectively doubling it in 1 turn in Gen 1. This will allow Snorlax to buff up its already good special defense, but also set up massive special attacks after stacking a few Amnesias. With a few potions and some patience, there's basically no battle in the game that Snorlax can't take out. The only downside of Snorlax is that it's quite slow, so it basically always moves second. However, it has the bulk to get around this flaw, as it will take way less damage from attacks than it deals back out. The thing that makes Snorlax the number 1 spot on this list isn't how strong it is, however, though it is extremely powerful. No, the thing that makes Snorlax the #1 spot on this list is where you find it. Famously, Snorlax blocks the ways on routes 12 and 16, requiring you to get the Pokeflute to wake it up to continue your adventure. Once you do this, it will engage you in battle. This is a requirement to beat the game, meaning unless you go out of your way to play the game in an unintended way, you will have to encounter a Snorlax on your way through Kanto. You will come face to face with one of the most powerful Pokemon in the entire game. At that point, why wouldn't you capture it and use it as part of your team? It's such a no-brainer that it's hard to justify not using Snorlax, unless you've just played through Kanto so many times with one that you purposefully avoided to make your playthroughs unique. Snorlax may be in more people's Hall of Fame team than any other Pokemon outside of the starters, and its combination of power and placement in the game is exactly why.